Welcome back to AutoTechNick, and today we're working on this 1982 Ferrari 400i, and well, it has a few very peculiar issues that we have to see if we can get to the bottom of. Before I talk about what we're going to be diving into on the engine, I want to give you guys a quick peek at this car because it is absolutely stunning. Excellent condition. As we mentioned, it's a 1982 400i. And I will say that this client actually sought this car out. He actually flew over to Italy and picked this up in Modena and actually drove it around Italy for quite a bit before he had it shipped back over here. I know he's taken this on quite a few road trips over here stateside. I think he's taken it from Seattle to Monterey. So with the time that this client's had the car, it's actually started to develop a few nuances or, a few little quirks that's what we're chasing after. And really right now we're on kind of a data gathering mission. So we do know that this car, it has 60,000 kilometers, so roughly what, 40,000 miles. It is consuming oil, so there's oil consumption issues. He's not overly worried about that, but we do have questions about how tired the engine may or may not be. So we kind of want to get that information of the health of the engine. The other issue is, it's a very unusual one. When the car is warmed up and running and you depress the clutch, the idle speed drops. And it almost stalls the car when you're trying to move it around. Completely the opposite of what you'd expect. You'd expect to press in the clutch, release the load from the engine from the transmission, have the idle speed increase. No, not on this car. The clutch pedal effort is extremely high, very heavy. So I have some suspicions of what is going on. Really, my two leading causes with the engine stalling when you're pressing the clutch in is a thrust bearing issue on the crankshaft, which we hope is not the case. The other one, which I hope is the case, is a release bearing issue, and I hope that's associated with the clutch pedal effort. Our goal for today is kind of to gather some information on the health of the engine. Is there a thrust bearing issue? Do we have anything glaringly obvious with the oil consumption? And then can we find the true cause of this difficult pedal and this idle speed drop when you press the clutch in? Those are going to help steer the conversation with the client of what we're going to be doing to the car overall. So we're not necessarily jumping into this car to solve the problem today. We're trying to diagnose it, get information, and figure out what our path forward is. So let's hop in the car and I'll fire it up and show you guys exactly what is happening when you press in the clutch. All right. There we go. So fires up. I noticed it was starting to surge for idle a little bit. The car is moderately warm, not fully up to temperature, but not cold. But you guys probably can see if I can get a shot where you guys can see the tack in my foot. There you go. So we got our tack over here. I'm down here on the clutch and I'm gonna press it in. And you can probably hear that noise too. That's where I'm really leading towards a release bearing on this. So it's coming up a little bit. It's not acting up that bad right now. Obviously Murphy's Law because I'm filming, but earlier it was much more dramatic. And the clutch actually feels like there's 2 points to travel. Like you push it down and it gets much firmer right there. And then I have to overcome that. Like I said, I was hoping that it would actually show up better on camera, but it's not right now. But when you're here pressing the clutch, you can actually feel it. So there's a couple, basically 3 checks that I want to do today. We're going to take an oil filter off, we're going to cut it open, and we're going to check for any metal in it. That's going to help us understand if there is a thrust bearing issue, which, like I said, we don't want, because if we find a thrust bearing issue, the engine has to come out and get rebuilt, essentially. And there's no really point on digging a lot deeper at that juncture of things. So that's probably going to be the first thing we do before we invest a ton of time. I'm hoping, and I don't think we're going to find anything in the oil filter, but they're cheap. So we're just going to do that real quick. Also, we're going to run through a compression test real fast, just get a good idea of what the compression is, make sure everything's fine there, give us a general idea of health of the engine. If we see anything that may indicate that we need to, we might have to move into a leak down test, but I'm still waiting on my air compressor to arrive here, so we're not doing that today. And then we're going to have my buddy Anthony hop in the car. He's going to be able to operate the clutch with it running while I have the car up in the air, and I can look in through the windows of the transmission and inspect our release bearing and see if we can kind of isolate what the cause of this issue is. And there's also a few things we may do with the clutch and the linkage, depending on the results from our other tests. So to get started, we're gonna pop an oil filter off, get it cut open, and I'm gonna show you guys a couple tricks on checking those oil filters for metal and oil. All right, so we got the oil filter off the car and cut open. Just use a handy dandy oil filter tool, which is nice to have. If you're desperate and you need something, you could just cut them with a Sawzall. There's a million different ways you could cut it open. The nice thing about this tool is it minimizes more metal getting into the filter. So we have the top of the filter off and pull this stuff out. So a lot of people I see, we'll talk about this, is they'll pop the filter out and then this is where they sit here and they look inside the pleats trying to find some metal. And this car, the client, I asked him how old this oil was and he gave me the mileage, and I think this has a couple 100 kilometers on it, but you can see the color of it. This oil is Liquid Moly, so it kind of has that unusual like gray moly, I guess for lack of better terms, look to it, which is deceiving, but it's also saturated in this paper element, so it's hard to see if there's anything in there. And this is where I usually see a lot of people stop when they open the oil filter and they inspect the pleats. And that's where they determine if there's metal in there or not. We're gonna go a little bit further. I'm going to tear out a small section of this paper. We're gonna wrap it up in a paper towel and then stick it in the bench vise, compress it in the bench vise. That's gonna squeeze all the oil out of this paper element, and that's gonna make it a lot easier for us to inspect it for any metal or debris. So I'm gonna get that torn out, get that done, and I'll bring you back and show you the difference once you do that extra step. So here's our paper element after I squeezed it with 2 rags. I did it twice. This is the second time because so much oil came out of it. And all I can see is there's one small speck right there. And if we had a thrust bearing failure or any bearing failure inside the engine, or I should say any real failure in the engine, you would see this littered with a whole lot more, even with the limited mileage that it has. So I was just here talking to Anthony and we were kind of discussing it. There's another piece there, small piece right there, that it's just as important or just equally as important to know that there is no metal in the filter as there is finding metal in the filter. So it's worth this check because it kind of helps us, you know, make the judgment call that the engine is okay and there's nothing really catastrophically wrong with the bearings. And if we flip this over, you guys can see the difference. I'll try to show you the difference, how much easier it is to read the pleats once you actually go and press all the oil out. So it doesn't take very long at all to cut the filter out in the paper, and you can actually see what's going on there like that once all the oil's out. So that checks out good. Like I said, I think this is a release bearing issue, but I wanted to check before we kept running the car, pressing on the clutch, and just verify. Really, it's making known facts that we know what's going on so that way we can continue our diagnosis. So while we were waiting for the oil to drain, we actually pulled all of the spark plug wires out. We're gonna move on, knock out a compression test really quick. That way we can put everything back together. The car will be runnable again. We'll have that information from the compression test, and then we're gonna get the car in the air, start looking at the release bearing, the pilot bearing, and trying to isolate this down. So I'll get that knocked out real quick, and I'll bring you guys back once we have the results from the compression test. So we've been at it, looking at this 400 a little bit. Let me get you guys updated with where we're at. We finished up the inspection of the oil filter. Found good news, no metal in there, nothing alarming, nothing concerning. Got the new filter on. We had the spark plugs out, spark plug wires off, ran through, did a compression test. Again, nothing alarming, nothing concerning. So you can see right here, we're at 185, 185, 185, 180, 175, 185, 185, 180. Pretty even all the way across the board. Compression looked really good. So we went, put all the spark plugs back in, spark plug wires back on, had the car up and running, raised it up in the air, and that's where I took advantage of having Anthony to operate the clutch while I was underneath the car, kind of visually inspecting things and just taking a peek. So let me get the car raised up and I'll show you what we did underneath. All right, so here we are up under the car, and let's talk about this first. I popped this access panel off so I could get to the flywheel, and I was actually doing a quick measurement of our crankshaft thrust. I wanted to measure how much play is there. My thinking is if we had a crankshaft thrust bearing failure, and if that was causing the issue, it would be where the bearings would be getting worn, and once those bearings start to wear and fail, when the crankshaft gets pushed into them when the clutch is pressed in, that they're actually causing a lot of friction, causing everything, a lot of drag on the engine, causing it to slow down and drop our RPM. So, although, you know, ideally I'd want this 90 degrees to the flywheel, but we can't really do that realistically here, so I just kind of did a quick down and dirty setup. I already ran through and checked it, and I was actually able to get up here on the crank pulley, right up here, and just gently push it forward, and then back here in between the flywheel back, and we measured 6 thousandths once we had the gauge zeroed out. So that kind of supports the matching theory, or the lack of, that we found with the oil and oil filter, where I don't think there's any issues internally inside the engine. When we had the car running, I had Anthony up there pushing the clutch in, and you can see up in there we have a release bearing. I put a stethoscope on it. I couldn't really hear anything. I was visually looking at everything. I didn't hear or see anything abnormal or alarming or concerning. There's no red flags. It's probably not going to get this on camera, but up in the bell housing there is a few little specks of shiny metal, which I thought that was like, well, it could be from the clutch, it could be from something failing. Hard to say, inconclusive there. But come over here to the linkage, and this is all cable operated. So there's our clutch cable coming in to this pivot on this linkage to our fork arm right there. I ended up pulling this pin out right there, and then had Anthony operate the clutch without, or I should say operate the clutch pedal without it being connected to the clutch down here. And he reported that the effort was completely normal. There was no resistance, no effort, nothing abnormal. So that kind of helps me isolate down to our really stiff pedal should be from this linkage up into the transmission. And I actually had him run the car, and I was operating the clutch with the linkage disconnected and kind of pressing it on and off the pressure plate. And again, nothing that just screamed at me that there was a big problem. I'm still kind of zeroing in to where I suspect that there could be a issue with the clutch release bearing, but also the pilot bearing. So if we keep in mind, the pilot bearing has the input shaft of the transmission into the crankshaft, and if that pilot bearing, it's only spinning and moving once the clutch is engaged. And if that pilot bearing is seizing and causing a lot of resistance, and maybe that's the case, one would think the transmission would just rotate with the pilot bearing. I'm not positive. I'm gonna sit and think on this a little bit, see if I come up with any other ideas of things to test or check. But I think the reality of the situation is I'm probably gonna talk to the client and recommend that we might be consideration to remove the transmission, inspect the pilot bearing, inspect the release bearing. It could be something with the clutch. There's nothing that just seems obvious, so we might have to do some exploratory work, pull that all out, and investigate those items. And unfortunately on this, although we have plenty of room here on the transmission to get it out, there's lots of space. It's all a torque tube set up back here to a rear diff. So it'll be a little bit of work to get that out, not a ton of work because we're gonna be back here with the diff and the torque tube, but plenty of space to get it out up there. So I kind of think that's where I'm at, and that was really my goal for today, was kind of hit these checks, get those done. Now that I have the answers to these checks, it's gonna let me think about this a little bit more, give it some thought. I'll communicate my findings to the client. He and I will talk, we'll decide on a path forward or what we think we should do next, and then we'll move on. I did realize there was one thing I also completely forgot to tell you guys about this car. One of the other complaints is it has a rattle on the engine when it's really warm. Client and I both pretty certain that it's the timing chain that just needs to be adjusted. That's one of those things that we're waiting until we know what the cause of this RPM drop issue is before we go in and start chasing after that, because if we were thinking worst case scenario, what if it needs an internal engine repair? There's no point chasing time on dealing with the timing chain rattle. So we're still, unfortunately, on diag trying to find this cause of the idle drop. Like I mentioned, I'm gonna report this back to the client, and then once I get some direction and what we decide we're gonna move forward, I'll bring you guys back and we'll continue on. Well, we're back on the 400 and we're gonna be digging a lot deeper today. And it's actually about a week later, so I had a chance to report back to the client with all the information we found last week on the car and really the status of where we're at. And from that conversation, decided that, you know, I would really like to get the transmission removed from the car. I want to inspect the pilot bearing. I want to inspect the release bearing. I want to look at the clutch. I want to see where that metal glitter or those small metal flakes I saw in the bell housing are coming from. So we're gonna get that taken care of, and that's gonna help me isolate those things. So hopefully we're hoping we're gonna find the smoking gun and a big red problem there. But if not, we know that that's all fine. So we have known good facts knowing that that's not the problem. Hopefully we find what's wrong in the transmission when we pull it out. But if not, we know that that's not a problem. We know that the health of the engine's fine. So at that point, if we had a good compression test, if no metal in the oil, bearings are good, transmission clutch, all that stuff's fine, which I think the problem's gonna be in there. But let's pretend. Then I can justify spending more time on the top side of the engine, working to tune, adjust, and set our idle mixture on our CIS, and potentially look at that as a cause of the problem that we're having. My gut instinct's telling me it's mechanical just by the way it feels and acts, but I'm trying to eliminate sections of the engine and possibilities so that way the time that I spend on the car is the most useful and smartest use of the client's money. So that's where we're gonna start on getting the gearbox out of the car, but I will get the car raised up in the air so that way I'm able to show you kind of what we have to work around, what we're continuing with to get this gearbox out of the car. All right, let's grab you guys some light now that we got the car up and get you up here so that way you guys can see exactly what we're working with here. So there's actually quite a bit of room around the bell housing in the tunnel on the gearbox. So that's a pretty favorable situation. We have our reverse light switch there we need to disconnect. Obviously our clutch linkage there, speedometer cable there. There's two ways to go about the shifter. This method I've never tried. You can see those two bolts right there on either side. Unbolt those and then leave the shifter in the car. I've never done it that way, but we're gonna try that way today. Previously I've pulled apart the center console on the top to get the shifter out, and the interior of these cars aren't really made to be pulled apart. So it was a bit of work. So that way we're gonna give that other method a shot today and see how it works for us. We have this tie rod we'll have to take off here, and this is where it gets really different from other cars. We have a torque tube here, and this is actually aligned really well. This is our access hole, and you can actually see the clamp right there and the bolt. So we're gonna have to position that in the correct position so we can get tooling in there to loosen that bolt to get it off the output shaft of the transmission. We're gonna have to take the torque tube off the back of the gearbox here, but you can see we have this cross member we're continuing with. It actually gets a little tight right here. We have a park brake cable to worry about, and it's bolted onto our rear diff, our third member here, which is mounted right here, these two mounts, which is pretty easy to get to there. And then back here you can see we have, what, 4 inches, maybe 5, to slide this back. Obviously we have our axles up there. It's been a while since I did this. I was looking at pictures of the last one that I pulled, and I can't remember if I kept the torque tube on the third member and pulled it out as a complete unit, or if I separated the third member, pulled it out, and then pulled the torque tube out. We have over here access points, I believe right here or up there where we can get the bolts loosened from that. I would hate to have everything just kind of resting in a peculiar position, then find out we don't have enough clearance to get the gearbox out and get it off the clutch shaft, get it off the input shaft. I think the smarter move here is to pull the rear wheels, unbolt our axles here. That's not really a ton of work to get that taken care of. Then we'll unbolt our torque tube up here at the transmission, take it off of our shaft, and at that point we're gonna loosen our mounts, and I think we're gonna slide this back, which is gonna allow us to get it disconnected from the transmission. And then once we get it back and off, these mounts slid back, we can actually drop this down and then slide it all the way out of the car. So we'll leave the torque tube bolted onto the third member right here and take it all out as one big unit. And then we'll have all the space we need for the transmission. A little awkward. Fortunately, Anthony's coming in today, so he's gonna be able to help me, so I'll have an extra set of hands. We can lower the car down and use a floor jack underneath this to get it slid out and pulled out, because unfortunately I don't have a tranny jack yet. But that's really what we're looking at. I'm gonna get started on this. I'll bring you guys back in a little bit once we probably get this torque tube close to being out or most of the way out to show you kind of any obstacles or anything we had to overcome on that and how that whole process went for us. And yeah, let's get to this thing. Let's get this clutch out. I wanna see what's going on, and now we have a better light. I don't know if you guys can get up in there and see like the little glitter flakes. I think it's gonna be hard to capture here on camera. We'll definitely be able to see it once we get this transmission out of the car. So we got some work to do so we can get this stuff out. We can inspect these parts and see what's going on. We'll see you guys in a few. All right, so our first big chunk is out of the car. You can see we have the rear diff and torque tube out. Went through, unbolted the rear axles, unbolted our slip joint on the inside of our torque tube. I'll show you that on the transmission in a second. Unbolted the torque tube and really had to work to get it off of the transmission, then drop the pumpkin down below the fuel tanks to the rear of the car and then slide everything out. So I'll take you guys over here and show you the car. Rear axles still in place. So you can see the back side of the CV joints there. The rear trans mounts, they're just right here, slid straight off. I did take our e-brake cable right here off, just at that joint, just to give us more working room. It was just one cotter pin and a small shaft. And then you can see up here is our slip joint, which we have to loosen this hardware here. And when you're taking the torque tube out, you gotta be careful, because if you have a bad angle to it, it's gonna bind up on this inner shaft here, although the outer housing is gonna wanna move off the transmission. And then that can actually move the shaft inside the torque tube. And depending on the style of torque tube, that can actually cause damage. So you wanna be very careful there. And it takes a little bit more time to free the torque tube off of this inner shaft. And then once it's off there, we just had it resting here and then moved our floor jack and everything back to the rear. Slid everything rear till we basically had an in limit here, dropped it down below and pushed it out. I don't have a transmission jack yet, so we just did it with a floor jack down on the ground. Going back together, I'm definitely gonna get a transmission jack here because that's gonna make it a lot easier. It's been on the to-do list, I just haven't executed it yet. So now that we have that out of the way, it's very free and clear to the transmission. We'll have to get the strut here off, our speedometer cable, clutch linkage, reverse lights up there, remove all the bell housing bolts, and I think we're gonna do the same thing on the transmission. We'll just lower the car down, put the floor jack on it, get it moved off, lower down, and then we're gonna have access to our clutch. So we're gonna carry on with our little project here, and we'll see you guys back in a couple minutes. All right, we are back. Most of the day has come and gone. Anthony already left. He helped me get done what we needed to get done. And I have some excellent news. This is the situation I always want to find myself in, and that's where we went into the car doing some exploratory diagnostic work, removing some components, and we found a smoking gun. Always the best. And this one's interesting because what we found, I would think that we should have had some other symptoms. It should have been glaringly obvious what was wrong, and I'm kind of baffled that we did not have any other symptoms other than what we had. It's crazy. But before I show you exactly what we found, I'll give you guys a quick peek. We got our rear diff, torque tube all out of the car, so that's all situated and arranged. We got our gearbox over here, and that's really where we want to come and talk about. We got our release bearing here on the gearbox, and this release bearing indexes in with our clutch fork, so it does not spin. It is locked in place, and it has no ability to rotate. The face of this release bearing should rotate, so that way it can interface with the clutch when you're engaging and disengaging the clutch. You can see that that face is pretty tore up. And on the back side, I'll try to capture it, you can see that all the balls inside there are dislodged, and we even have either the balls or part of the race coming out. I can tell you that this bearing is seized, locked solid. There's not an ounce of movement that I have in between the two halves of this bearing, which we should have plenty of movement. Now, since this locks into our clutch fork here, and we have no rotation right there when it's in position, when you depress the clutch and push this into the pressure plate, I'll bring you guys over here and show you our pressure plate. This piece right here is part of the pressure plate that stays intact. So once we were pushing the clutch in into our pressure plate, this was essentially pressing on here. It was metal on metal, and it was basically acting like a big brake, slowing the engine down to the point to where it would stall. Why this wasn't making the most ungodly noise when it was engaging and you're pressing on here is besides me. This car made no noise at all. You would think with metal on metal, like you can hear it right now. You think that it would have been making a ton of racket down there, but it made no noise whatsoever, dead quiet. So this explains all those little metal glitter and flakes I found in the bell housing, because this stuff was just metal on metal chewing itself up. So we need a release bearing. That's easy, smoking gun. Pressure plate, it's seen better days. We're already here. We're just gonna replace that with a new one. Clutch disc, it actually has some cracks on the friction surface right about there at about the 3 o'clock position, but it's also under spec. So it's supposed to be at 8.5 millimeters of thickness. It's currently at 6.8. So we're under spec, it needs a new clutch disc anyways. And our pilot bearing, it is almost completely seized up as well. So in between the pilot bearing and the release bearing, I have no idea how we didn't have more symptoms, we didn't have more noise. It's kind of baffling, but it makes all the sense. Once you push that clutch in, we are basically just throwing the brakes on the engine, slowing it down. And I still, even now that I know that that's what the cause was, it baffles me that it just was not grinding or making any unusual noises. It was butterly smooth. The clutch pedal was heavy, but it had its normal range of motion. Either way, I'm glad that we went the route of getting the gearbox out, because that led us right to the path. And now that we see what's going on, it's easy to look back and connect all the dots of the sequence. So that's where we're at with this mystery. I think what I need to do now is I'm gonna have to have the conversation with the client. I don't see any reason why we're not putting a clutch, resurfacing the flywheel, replacing all these bearings. There's no reason, but we're gonna give him an estimate so he knows the cost of the repairs. I'll bring you guys back once we have the new parts, flywheels machined. We'll get this thing back together, back into the car, and we'll be able to run the car and make sure that the clutch operation is good. Our pedal effort should be back down to the 40 pounds that it should be, not the 60, 70 that it has now. And we should have no noise, no engine stalling. And now that we know this information, that opens us up to do all the small loose odds and ends he wants to do to this car as well, which I'll probably make different videos on. We were holding off on any of that until we knew the cause of this problem, because we were concerned for the worst. I'm super stoked that we found out a situation that is not the worst. I would say this is probably a best case scenario. So I'm gonna talk to the client. We'll probably see you guys back here in a couple weeks once parts arrive, where we work to reassemble this 400. Welcome back, guys. We are continuing back on our 400 project. For you guys, it was just a couple of minutes. For us, it's been maybe a week, week and a half. Client approved all the repairs. We got all the parts on order, and I've actually gone ahead and already got a little bit of a head start on what we're doing. So you can see that we have our new pressure plate here, or excuse me, our new clutch disc here, our new pressure plate here to rectify our issue. We already have the new release bearing, which I've already installed, but you can see right here, it spins very nice and free. So I've spent quite a bit of time cleaning up the bell housing, cleaning all the spines of our clutch shaft, input shaft here, lubricating all the contact points, and getting all this so it operates nice and free. Also, while the gearbox was out, I removed the rear output shaft seal and replaced that with a new one. And I had to replace, or yes, generally you need to replace these ring nuts because they get staked in the position. And on the old one, I tried to drive the stakes out before I took the nut off, and it actually ends up tearing where they put the stakes into it. So you generally, if I can get them off without tearing them and back on and restaking them, you can do that occasionally, but for the most part, I just order new ones and have them replaced. So that's installed, but it is not torqued yet. The reason being is it's torqued to 190 Newton meters, and with the gearbox here on the stand in neutral, even if it was in gear, there's really no feasible way we're gonna get that torqued. So I'm gonna wait till the gearbox is installed into the car. We can put the gearbox in gear, or we'll be able to go ahead and stop the flywheel from rotating on the ring gear, be able to get this torqued to spec, and then we'll stake these in so that way it's locked where it needs to be. And what looks different here from when we removed it is I did remove the coupler here for the torque tube, and I did measure the depth of that in relation to our output shaft flange here and the flange to the transmission. So that way I can be sure to get that back at the exact same depth. That's important because that matters to where I can get to the hardware to tighten it back up to the torque tube. So we got that taken care of. Also, while we were here, we went and replaced the lower support bushing here, which this part is the exact same as the lower shock mount bushings. This one was a little bit of work to get installed. It was a pretty tight fit. I think most of the struggle that I had was with my tooling. I was using a through bolt initially to install it with some cups, and the through bolt actually had deflected and bent a little, which then sent the bushing at an angle and was wanting to drive it in crooked. I ended up swapping that out for a larger ball joint C-clamp press tool that I have, and it pressed in. It was tight, it was very tight, but it pressed in without any issues. So we got that taken care of. And then we'll take you guys over here to our torque tube, and it's really all the same except we've installed new mounts on either side. Got that taken care of, but for the most part, everything else there is left as is. It was one of those things where the client told me, if I come across anything on the car, let's refresh it with new. Let's make sure everything's taken care of, because he's planning on keeping this for a very long time and putting a lot of miles on it. So we're being more proactive on a lot of these things. This bushing was pretty shot, so that definitely needed to be taken care of. I don't think this output shaft seal is in too bad a shape, but we got that new one in there. And clutch wise, I should also mention a new pilot bearing, obviously. And our flywheel, it's all installed already, resurfaced, torque striped. These are torqued to 85 Newton meters. That's all straightforward. And the flywheel has a dowel pin on the crankshaft to the flywheel, so you don't have to worry too much about orientation. So I'm to the point where I'm gonna work to get the clutch installed into the car and pressure plate, use my centering tool, get that on, get that all torqued in the spec. Once I have that done, we're gonna slide the gearbox in, and you can see that we now have a transmission jack, which is gonna make this wildly easier. It's absolutely, with a transmission jack, to get this transmission back in, one-man job. It's gonna be helpful that we have two here. The torque tube, you could probably do it with one man, but it's definitely a lot better to grab an extra set of hands and help you get the torque tube installed, just because it's awkward and cumbersome. So when we go to do the torque tube, we're gonna throw the rear diff third member on the tranny jack back here, then have somebody up in the front of the torque tube to help feed it in and work it in with the tranny jack. And we'll have the car at full height, as opposed to when we removed everything and we had the car on the ground and a floor jack. This will be a lot nicer, easier to go back in, easier for us to work, operate, and move around on. Hopefully today, the goal is to have this thing up and running so that way we can feel how much effort it takes to depress the clutch pedal. And also, I mean, we know the engine's not gonna stall. We found the problem. We know the smoking guns. We know we're gonna resolve the problem, but I'm just curious to see how much nicer that clutch pedal feels once it's all the way back together. So I'm gonna jump into it, maybe sit you guys down, and we'll see where the day takes us. We're back, and the 400 is off the lift, all buttoned up and finalized, and pretty much ready to be delivered back to the client. So where we stand right now is the clutch repair is 100% finished, and also the car came in with a smaller list of repairs that the client wanted me to look at as well, that we had kind of set onto the shelf or the back burner until we knew what was exactly going on with the engine and the stalling issue. Would we have known that it was just a clutch and the car came in on the initial hit? We probably would have had all that stuff talked about up front, but we waited to find out what the car actually needed with the stalling issue, because our minds were anticipating the worst. And since that didn't turn out to be, we were able to jump on and address those items. I didn't really cover those in a specific technical video because each of the items were pretty short and quick and easy, so it just didn't really work out to be enough content to get taken care of. But what have I done to the car since we finished the clutch work on it? Well, for one, let's come up to the engine bay and I'll show you guys what we did up there, and we'll talk about those real quick. So we'll get the hood open. So up here in the engine bay, probably the main thing that we had to take care of is I needed to adjust the idle mixture on our CIS system on our fuel distributors here. So the car had a big issue with sooting out the tailpipes. He would fire it up and it would just throw a lot of soot and carbon out the back. It was real bad. You can see that there's a lot in the tailpipes. And even here in the shop, when I'd start it and move it, it was a significant problem. So I told him that we could get in, we'll make some CIS adjustments, and that's where I used my 5-gas analyzer. I was actually measuring the emissions out of the tailpipe, so I was watching my CO, and then I was making my adjustments up here on the fuel distributors to get my CO where I wanted it. So I was leaning the car out, but I didn't want to lean it out so far where I developed a lean misfire, so there is a very small window of where you want this set right at. This car really treated me well. Sometimes when you get into making idle mixture adjustments, you can just kind of open up Pandora's box. It ends up being a lot of work, and I was in and out on this one extremely quickly. The adjustments dialed right on in. They were stable. The car ran great, and I can tell you, once I made those adjustments, I was like, well, that was easy. We'll just let that be. And then I kind of kept the car around the shop, and as I was moving it around, we had a radical difference on the reduction of soot coming out the back of the car. So that was absolutely fantastic news, because I love it when I can get in there and get it taken care of quick and easy for the client. The other thing that we had to do was the car had a bit of a noise from the engine, and that's one thing we were, at the beginning of the video, we were kind of wondering if that noise was related to the stalling issue, which once we found the clutch, we knew it wasn't. We were speculating that the car needed a timing chain adjustment, but we didn't jump right into that because the stalling issue was a bigger priority to find out what the cause of that was. Once that was resolved, I did jump in and adjust the timing chain on this car, which is a periodic maintenance item you need to do on these Colombo engines. And I'll say that the timing chain adjustment didn't take that long to adjust the timing chain. After I went through all the work to remove the lower alternator to get access to the jam nut for the timing chain tensioner. So that actually ended up taking a bit of work to get that done. Did it all from the bottom of the car. Was able to get that alternator off, get the car running, have it warm, loosen the jam nut, and then just tighten the timing chain tensioner a little bit to get the slack out of the chain to quiet it up. Got that taken care of, and basically where we're at on this particular car and its timing chain, we're pretty much used up the last of the adjustment that we could have. So if the chain starts making more noise, the client's gonna be looking at a timing chain replacement, which again, kind of periodic maintenance on these older Colombo engines. So we got that taken care of back there. And one of the other big things that we did was our rear self-leveling suspension. So this car had the early Type 1 self-leveling suspension, which is known to be very problematic. It just is all self-contained in a Coney shock, and he's had his shocks rebuilt, I think, twice, and it just continued to fail, continued the sag in the rear. So we went and replaced the self-leveling suspension with just some traditional Coney rear shocks that have been modified to have a helper spring on them and a spring perch on them. So we got those taken care of and installed. Made some adjustments to the ride height. I actually just went and took the car to the fuel station and filled it all the way up so that way I could get all the weight in the car so I could analyze the ride height one last time. Got that taken care of. Again, that was straightforward. That was just kind of unbolting the shocks, bolting in the new shocks. And I will say, took the car out for a ride, drives great. The ride, fantastic. So we got that dialed in. And I think the only other thing that we did with the car that was here was he had a concern with the fuel vapor out the back of the car. And we were kind of discussing that yesterday. The client came in, we looked at it, we talked. The car still has all the original fuel hoses that feed from tank to tank to the vapor canister, all those other areas. So there could be fuel permeating out of those. We did talk about potentially retrofitting in an aftermarket charcoal canister to help with the fuel vapor issue. These mufflers on the car sit right below the fuel tank, so they heat the tank up. Creates a lot of heat and pressure on the tanks. Not a great system and design on it, but basically where we're at, I told the client, I'm like, I can dive into this if you want to right now, but it's beginning of summer, and I don't think this one's going to stop the car from running on the road. And rather than have the car in the shop while we order the replacement hoses, try to source the right fabric type of hoses, and go through all that, why don't you just take the car, drive it, and enjoy it for the summer? And then maybe in the wintertime, if you want me to go and chase after those hoses and get that stuff replaced, or this client does like to tinker on his car and work on it himself some, so maybe he wants to do it. But I was basically just saying, hey, let's just try to limit our scope of work here now. The car is completely drivable, and you can enjoy it for the summer, and we don't need to chase into that fuel vapor issue right now, because if we do, it's going to bite right on into your driving season. So that's where we're at. We kind of put a pause on the fuel vapor issue, and today my goal is to get the car truly wrapped up, which means final road tests and getting the car cleaned up and ready to be delivered back to the client. So that's where we're at with this 400. Now it's time to get back in it, take it out on one last road test. Well, quick change of plans. As I was sitting here filming that last section of video looking at the car, I realized that after I put fuel in it and drove it, our rear had appeared to have come down a little bit. So then I pulled some measurements, and sure enough, it came down and settled. So you can see I went and jacked the car back up, popped off the wheels, went and turned up the collars on those new rear shocks. I went 5 turns each side, and now my measurements show the car sitting a little bit higher in the rear, just a hair, as opposed to the front. It looks a lot better. It was looking a little saggy here in the back, and I wanted it on a fuel tank. You got to keep in mind, there's no driver, there's no luggage. I know this client takes his cars on a lot of rallies and a lot of road trips, so it's going to be loaded down. I think my plan of attack here is I'm going to jam in the remaining lug nuts, get my wheels torqued, take it out on another test drive. I'm going to leave the lower locking collars loose on the car. So we drop the dags down, you can see that they're loose. That's how much I raised them up. I'm going to leave those loose, drive the car, make sure I'm happy with the ride height before I pull the wheels and lock those back in place, then call the car good for the client. But the way we have it now, we're good enough to hop in it and take it on that road test. All right, that looks considerably better on our ride height. I ended up coming back, adjusting the rear several times, so I got it where I was happy with it. It really was quite a bit lower after I installed those shocks and let the car sit and then took it for a road test. Got it worked. I'm really happy with it now. It sits a lot better, has a lot better stance, and that's going to be a great product. I think the client's going to be very happy with it. Beautiful car. Absolutely beautiful. Man, I can already tell you, it is just such a pleasure to drive this car. The clutch, so much nicer, such an improvement. You know, looking back on it, you know, I've already had the opportunity to start editing the video on this car, so I have the benefit of 20/20 hindsight. And when I was in the car pushing the clutch, the engine running, you could slightly hear a little bit of noise in that release bearing. But man, I would have expected with that metal on metal contact and that grinding for it to be making a whole lot more noise than it did. Now, if you remember, we said that it had 69 pounds of pedal effort, I recall, to operate the clutch. And once I put the clutch in, I actually went back and remeasured it, and we're right at spec at 40 pounds of pedal effort. These older cars do have a heavy pedal, but it feels completely normal, and it's not so heavy where it's hard to modulate. You can release it slowly and very controlled to get the engagement you want. This one, it was interesting. I mean, it should have been an easy diag because we should have had that noise. That was the only thing. We should have had a glaring noise that would have immediately told us that's a release bearing issue, but we didn't. Don't really know why. Made it a little unusual. But we got it all sorted, and fortunately it wasn't what the client was fearful of, which was a worst case scenario, which was something deeper inside the engine that was wrong. And one thing to keep in mind that the further I adjust the rear springs and the preload on those springs, which is raising our ride height, theoretically that could increase the stiffness of the rear of the car and change the ride quality of the car, but so far it feels fantastic. It's still a nice smooth GT cruiser. I don't think we're gonna have to really worry about that being an issue, but it is just one thing to keep in mind as we're adjusting those, that If I crank those all the way to the top, I effectively just increased the spring rate on those helper springs and made the rear significantly stiffer. So we want to find that right line where the car is going to sit right where we want, taking fuel load, passengers, luggage, all into account. Also, speaking about 20/20 hindsight, earlier in this video I said this car is an 82. I was wrong. This car is actually an 81, but all the paperwork and title on it calls that it's an 82. Just one of those things that I mentioned. I knew the client had told me that. I didn't download it to the hard drive and remember it. This car runs fantastic. What a great example of a 400. And I gotta tell you, these 400s, if you've never really been in a Ferrari GT car, especially a 400, you have so much greenhouse above you, so much visibility, the seating position, everything is so comfortable. I mean, you can just instantly tell that this car is built for long drives, long road trips. Very different from the mid-engine sports cars, but I love them equally as much. Fantastic cars, beautiful day today, windows down, cruising down the freeway. Not a bad day at work. Engine runs so smooth. Power delivery is great. There's no hesitations, no stutters. This is a really well kept, well sorted 400. I mean, this is easily the nicest 400 that I have driven. One that stands out that I've driven for the wrong reasons was a 400 automatic, and yes, the one with the GM Turbo 400 in it. And that car had 100,000 miles. I remember driving that on the freeway. I remember being fearful to get up to 50 miles an hour. It was not a good experience for a 400. That car obviously saw a lot of miles, a lot of neglect. It was not taken care of. It was not a good example. So it is refreshing to get into a very clean, very nice example. Everything's functional, drives great. It's got the proper transmission. What a treat. It is no wonder why this client chased after this car in Italy and brought it back home. Don't blame him one bit. Smart guy. Let's let that Colombo V12 do its thing. This thing runs so good. Absolutely pristine car. Absolute pleasure to be driving this one today. It's really hard to beat a Colombo V12. It really is. Well, our 400 is all wrapped up. We finished our road test. I did come back and finalize the suspension one more time. I ended up raising it up quite a bit more. It kept settling, but overall, I am very pleased with the final outcome. You can see that it's sitting quite a bit higher up there in the rear, and it's actually sitting just a hair higher in the rear than it is up in the front. I did so that way if he puts luggage and accounting for passengers, it should level out, but a dramatic difference in how the car came in. Not to mention, the car wasn't even drivable when it came in. We'd push the clutch in and it would stall. This one was definitely an interesting one because I still kind of stuck on it. We should have had more symptoms. We should have had that noise. And if it would have had that noise, it would have been pretty black and white, pretty obvious what the problem was. But sometimes you get those weird curveballs thrown at you, and it's one of those things where I'll probably never see one again that does that. Every one that I'll see, if I see one that's seized up again, I'll probably be screaming at me. But it was an interesting find. Luckily, it was an easy fix. We got it corrected. And it also, everything else in this car went pretty easy. I was able to get the CIS adjusted real quick and easy. Got his timing chain tightened for him. And really, it was a best case scenario across the board on this car. Very thankful for that. But what an example for our first 400 to have here on the channel. And this car, tell you what, guys, the more I look at it, the more I work on it. But more importantly, the more I drive this car, I'm falling in love with this car. It was absolutely a pleasure to drive. Definitely one of the more unique Ferraris. Some people aren't big fans of the styling, but for a good cruiser GT car, whew, it's hard to beat. And I gotta tell you, when it comes to the Ferraris, typically, the older the better for me. There is a few modern cars that I really do gravitate to and like quite a bit, but I really like the old cars. I like the charm of them. There's just something about them that really, really appeals to me. And this 400 really checks all those boxes. So I think that's all the content that this 400 is going to give us for now. So you guys know the drill. Drop a comment below, hit the like button, hit the hype button, forward the video to a buddy. And I always say at the end of these videos, guys, if you're not subscribed to the channel and you're at this point, what are you doing? Subscribe. As always, guys, thanks for watching. Appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next one.